All right, good morning, everybody. This is James Morris's Monday morning's edition of Ask the Master Auto Technician. And I know people all the time wondering about cars. Well, I have people all the time say, well, they don't make cars like they used to. Well, there's a lot of things they make the same way. You test the same way, work the same way, and there's some things that are different. Give you examples. Today, let's say a 1991 model Ford car, if you want to get into the computer. And you want to do drivability studies on it. Why is my car doing it versus, say, a 91 versus a 2011? So we're talking about a 20-year-old difference there. The difference is, both of them are four-cycle engines. Both of them have the same sensors on them. Both of them have they work almost the same way. The problem is, how do you get information out of them? The one that's a 91 model doesn't have a data stream that you can sit there and just plug a scanner into and get things to work like they're supposed to. That doesn't have it that way. It does not work. It's just not the way it works. You're going to have to sit there and find out what codes are in it. It's going to tell you what codes it has on the self-diagnostic ability. And then you're going to have to kind of work backwards by going to different components and try to figure out which ones are which and which one's working. And the most important thing is you always start at the oxygen sensor. Always. Always start, see if it's reading rich or see if it's reading lean when you're at a certain RPM. If you're at idle, at 1400 RPMs, and if you're at 2500 RPMs, make sure it's bouncing like it's supposed to. If it's not bouncing, that's your opening line. That's the biggest difference, is the type of information we get from cars from 20 years ago. Let's just say 1991 versus 2011. There's a big difference in how we get information and what we went to from OBD1 to OBD2, which supposedly started in 1995 and a half, 96, but I have found out this week that, well, I actually found a 94 Corvette from California that had OBD2 on it. Anyway, we're going to talk more about that later, but right now I got Frank Sundrum calling all the way from who knows where he's calling from. Good morning, Frank. Where are you calling from this morning, sir?
Good morning. I'm calling from near the old airport in Panama City, that enchanted land.
Now, speaking of enchanted land, that is one of the premier growing areas of Bay County. It used to be Frannon Field back in the 60s, and it became Panama City Airport, and now it's Sweet Bay. Is that what they call it, that area over there?
Frannon Field. I don't exactly know what the area is called here, James.
Well, years ago...
I call it home.
You call it home. Well, we were talking about the differences on cars from 91 to 2011. I was just talking about if you had two Ford cars, and one was a 91 model and one was a 2011, the difference between those two is like night and day as far as getting information out, as far as how you're able to diagnose them. But the most important thing is, when you're doing diagnostics, always start at the watchdog. Is the car running rich, or is it running lean, or does it have fuel control? If you don't have fuel control, that's what that check engine light usually means, is you don't have fuel control or you're using too much fuel. But anyway, what's on your mind this morning, sir?
Well, I think that's a good topic for us to pick up and talk about how the feedback loop really affects things, and you're absolutely right. The O2 sensor can tell many stories about what's going on with the car.
You betcha, it really can. I call it the watchdog. It's watching what's going on, and it tells you. Well, I should say this is a neurotic watchdog, that 1 minute it's rich and 1 second it's lean, and it just can't make its mind up, and that's what it wants to do. It's got to be rich and lean, and it's supposed to change 4 times per second. But that, most people can't see that. That's why scanners slow it down, where you can see what's happening, and they kind of give you an average of what's going on, rich or lean, where you can see what's happening. But too many people, even in my industry, the ones that work in it, don't appreciate how that oxygen sensor works. They don't really understand how it works, so it's very difficult for them to do diagnostics, because a lot of techs don't know the difference between an oxygen sensor or an air-fuel ratio sensor, which doesn't bounce. It stays a steady voltage, where an oxygen sensor will bounce, rich and lean. So that's the biggest thing people need to understand, the difference between oxygen sensors and air-fuel ratio sensors and how they work together. But that's another show all in itself, to be honest with you, because that gets a little more complicated, and I don't want to go through all that right there, because you really need a scanner to do that. But you worked on cars back in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. What was the first car that you came into contact with a computer, Frank? What was the first one you came across?
Well, as you were talking about O2 sensors,
Mm-hmm.
James, it reminded me when I had Porsches, especially the 944s, which were fuel injection with Bosch fuel, they required, as a matter of routine maintenance, changing the O2 sensors, I think, every 36,000 miles.
Whoa.
You change the timing belt, you change the O2 sensor.
Wow.
It was all part of routine, whereas today, we seem to think that O2 sensors will last forever.
Well, I would say on average, an oxygen sensor will last about 100,000 miles on average. I've seen some go a lot longer. I see some go a lot less. But yeah, they last a lot longer. But it's amazing. Back then, you said you had to change them every 36,000 miles and change timing belts. The idea of changing a timing belt every 36,000 miles now, an oxygen sensor seems pretty extreme. And what years was that common? The 944, what, 80?
Well, those timing belts were about 1987, so not new technology, but not proven technology like it is today.
Oh, yeah.
But the big thing with the timing belt used to be the fact that it was an interference engine.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing you wanted to make absolutely sure is that timing belt did not break.
Have you ever had a timing belt break on an interference engine on you? I mean, I don't know if you have or not. I know I have. And it's not
I've
good.
seen them. I had a Jensen Healy that I sold to a guy, and I said, the first thing you want to do when you get home is change the timing belt. Here's a brand new timing belt. Here's the manual. It's not rocket science. Call me if you need help. And I heard stories about this guy. This was in Fayetteville, North Carolina, running up and down the street in the Jensen Healy, blowing off big iron and doing burnouts. And of course, his dad called me one night and telling me the engine just spun without any compression. And I said, yep. Timing belts.
Timing belt's gone.
I hated to tell him that, but he did not listen to me. Timing belts back in the day were not built the way they are now.
No, they're not. My first experience with a timing belt interference engine was on a Fiat 124. I did not know anything back in the late 70s. I did not know anything about interference engines. I mean, we didn't really see too much of it because timing belts were relatively new at that time for us. They had been around for a while, but most of the engines, like the Vegas, were non-interference, and the Pintos were non-interference. And then the interference engines came around, which like the Fiat or I think Toyotas were non-interference. All of them were non-interference except Fiat, I think at that time that I worked on. And I didn't know any better, and I was putting it together, and I just put things on there and turned it by hand, and I bent every dadgum valve on that sucker. Had to pull the head off on it, and that was my first experience back in 1979, learning how to work on overhead cam interference engines and how to put valves back in them when you bend them, because those were not adjustable. You had pucks you had to change. You had to change little wafers to get to cut the ends of the valve down to make them, if they were too tight, you had to cut the head off, the stem, grind the stem down to put in there. That's old school technology that, well, we don't see that anymore. I remember, didn't you have to do things like that on some of your cars you worked on? By grinding
from the Jaguars on, but I remember the Fiat, the 124 Sport Coupes, as well as the convertibles. Those were interference engines.
Boy, were they.
And you had to be so careful with them, much like you had to be so careful when I was putting together Ferraris and things like that, which had interference engines and timing chains.
Oh, yes. Oh, it's so true. The timing chains were interference. That's the only car that I knew that were interference were timing chains. I remember when I was a kid, if a timing chain slipped really, really bad, it could have been valves. But you didn't see it that often. But boy, by the time the 80s rolled around, interference engines left and right on Fiats and I think Nissans and all these cars that had timing belts, it got pretty hairy. And then I'd say around the year 2000, they started going away from timing belts to timing chains. And then the interference part stopped because we didn't have changed timing belts, but they were still interference engines. But I like the timing chains better for maintenance versus timing belts, because it's every 100,000 miles, no matter what kind of car you got, if it's got a timing belt to change. And that can be rather expensive every 100,000 miles, having to drop anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 to change a timing belt, water pump, seals, tensioners, idler pulleys, all the things involved with it, because you just don't change a timing belt. There's more to changing a timing belt than just changing a belt. There's a lot more to it, because you've gone 100,000 miles with it working flawlessly, and now you take it apart, put a new belt on there, and you're going to put extra pressure on the idler pulleys and on the tensioner and on the seals. And if you don't change all those things, they like to leak. And I'm sure you've run across that before too, those seals that leak after you put a timing belt on, if you don't change those seals. I don't know if you ever run across it, but I know I have, so that's why I changed them all.
Well, you know, my Porsche 944 taught me that you never just change just the timing belt, but you also change all the bearings, all the rollers, everything to just get everything right, because you do not want to have anything with a slop or a failure point in it.
That's so true.
For the future, because that was just throwing bad money after good.
Oh, it is so true. I have seen that before. We had a gentleman that came in here about a year or two ago, did his own timing belt in his Audi A4. He started it up, drove it 2 miles, and it died. He called me up and said, I did put a timing belt on my car, something happened, and it died. We towed the car in here. The belt was not put on correctly. He bent 4 out of 8 intake valves. And I went, oh, I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what to tell you, but all that work you did is for naught. Now you're, back then, if you just brought it to me, you'd had a bill probably of around $1,000. Now you've got about a $3,000 bill, because I got to pull the head off. I got to put a head gasket on it, put new valves in it. And he just said, that's I learned a very valuable lesson. So if you're listening out there and you want to put a timing belt on, if you don't have the tools, you don't have the training, you don't have the expertise, pay someone. If not, you're going to pay someone again to fix it right. That would be my advice to those people out there. What would you say to those people out there that want to change their own timing belt?
Well, my rule, I think my Porsche taught me the rule that whatever your hand can touch, change. So whenever I went into the changing the timing belt on it, I would also change the hoses that were nearby.
Oh, yeah.
Just because my hand was there, and I had to take them off anyway.
Well,
It sort of, the Porsches were never unreliable vehicles. They just demanded, they were kind of maintenance heavier. The timing belt every 36,000 miles.
Boy.
But that car never left me on the side of the road, no matter what.
I can't say that about a few cars I've owned. They've left me on the side of the road, and I try not to have those cars anymore. Frank, we got about a minute left. What would you like to tell people out there that are listening about working on their own cars? What would you?
All right. Let's talk about this. Approach everything. The University of YouTube is available. It has a great deal of information, if not good photography.
Absolutely.
Everybody on YouTube ought to be forced to use a tripod. The handheld stuff with the shark cam and the whip cam, people have no idea how to visually tell stories. Now, this is an area of experience for me, but hold that camera steady and speak, and stop saying what's up as you start your story.
I like that. Good advice out there, but YouTube is a wealth of information. There has been a few times that we've had to use YouTube to figure out cars or in repair procedures. Thank you so much, Frank, for calling. We'll talk to you again this, I think you're going to be calling, is it Wednesday morning you call? You call Wednesday morning, don't you?
All right, see you then.
See you Wednesday morning. All right, this is James Morris. We'll be right back with Scott Hobbs.
If you want the best deal in town for tires, you need to call Baytown Tires at 873-8900.
Hanson and the guys at Baytown Tires take pride in serving Panama City for over 20 years. Baytown Tires on Highway 98 in St. Andrews. All service work backed by a nationwide warranty.
Water is too powerful to fight alone. Mr. Rooter Plumbing. Sink, shower, and toilet emergency drain services.
Part of what I'd like to let you know is what we do and how we work our system. Basically, we've got about 700 stocking dealers scattered around the 15 counties here in the Big Bend area of the state. I run a fleet of trucks, vans, and what we call hotshot vehicles to deliver to our dealers quickly so they can help service you as fast and efficiently as they can. Provide timely and efficient service, and we're there to take care of our dealers, who in turn can take care of their customers.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our second half of our show. And every Monday morning, I have Scott Hobbs calling for Mr. Rooter Plumbing, and he sometimes has some really good advice for the do-it-yourselfer and the person that wants to keep that maybe doesn't have time to do it themselves, has an emergency or whatever, he can give you some advice to keep those emergencies from being worse than they should be. Like he taught me years ago to make sure when I leave home to cut off my water to my washing machine. That's right, those 2 rubber hoses back there, you don't think about them, they're out of sight, out of mind, but when they break, do they make a mess. Good morning, Scott. How you doing this morning, sir?
I'm wonderful, enjoying the cooler weather. How about you?
I haven't paid any attention to the weather. I got up this morning and came to work, and I said, it's just another day to go back to work, and at least it's not raining. That's the only thing I'm thankful for. But
right.
Now,
yep.
on these rubber
got
hoses,
a little taste of fall in there. Not much, but
not
a little
much.
bit.
Now, the rubber hoses, is that a big problem that people just seem to keep overlooking, even though we've been talking about it for years on washing machines? They seem to forget about those rubber hoses.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern that everybody needs to be concerned with. And you know what's interesting is a lot of the new washing machines are now coming with the stainless steel braided hoses because I guess they know that folks are not going to turn that water off. And what's interesting is if you read the paperwork for your washing machine, it will tell you to turn the water off at those valves behind it after every use. Now, I don't know of anybody that does that, including myself. So I've chosen to, use the stainless steel braided hoses.
Right, I don't know anyone that does that too. Now, I know when I went to use the stainless steel hoses, the one thing I didn't like about them was if you put them on the wall like they're supposed to, like from the factory, how it's made, it's such a sharp bend that your washing machine sticks out so much further. So I had to go buy a sharp 90, so my washing machine could be pushed up next to the wall. That was the biggest thing I didn't like about the stainless steel hoses. And I think, well, I didn't do it. Your Mr. Reuter did it. When y'all came over, y'all looked at us, well, the only thing you need, James, is to put a 90 on it. And I went, I never thought about putting a 90 on it. That way the hose is closer to the wall and not sticking out from the wall. And that was my first experience to preventive maintenance on plumbing. I never thought about putting hoses on it, on my washing machine. I never thought about cutting my water off when I went out of town to the entire house until after I started talking to you, because we had an ice maker that decided to drip while we were out of town for a weekend, came back, and the whole living room floor had about a 1/4 inch of water on it. So things like that, I never really thought about till I started learning to you that if you're not home, cut your water off. If you're not going to use it, wintertime's coming right up. What about these people on the beach that have these winter homes? What should they be doing to get ready for winter, since fall's right around the corner and the tourists are going home?
Well, definitely, if we need to start talking about being prepared for winter, especially if you have a summer home or a vacation home that you're going to be leaving abandoned for some time, because you can, we're in Florida. I mean, it can be 70 degrees today, and tomorrow they say, hey, we're going to have a freezing, night overnight. Right. It can come within a few days before they can have a chance to get back down here and take care of it. So, sure, they need to be prepared for that. My preference is always to shut the water off, to turn the water off, and kind of relieve the pressure. So you don't have a concern with freezing. That's the ultimate thing to do. If they're not going to do that, then I would say, wrap and insulate the pipes. Make sure you leave the heat on in the house. It doesn't have to be very hot, but it has to be warm enough to keep the pipes from freezing. Open the cabinets to allow some air circulation, especially in some of the older homes that may not have the insulation that the newer homes have now.
Well, that's good advice. Cutting the water off. If you cut the water off, make sure you relieve the pressure. If you cut the water off, that way, so there's no, because the water will stay pressurized if it doesn't leak, and so you want to cut the water off. And you said insulate the pipes. What about toilets? The holding tanks. Should we put antifreeze in them? Now I don't know, because we talked about this before. But if they have septic tanks, would the antifreeze destroy the septic tanks? That was one of the things I wanted to ask. I know you said there's that my preference would be not to do that, but I would at least flush the toilets and get the majority of the water out of the system. Now, it has to be a really hard freeze for it to expand and break that porcelain, because you've got 2 directions for that water to expand to. So it would really have to be some kind of freeze. We have had people ask us to frost-proof their homes,
and we would put the pet friendly, the environmentally friendly antifreeze into the bowls, just upon their request. But I would say that it would have to be some kind of cold weather to damage a toilet.
Well, I remember, I think it was back in '82. I'd been in business a couple of years, and we had the temperature dropped to Panama City to 17 degrees. And I remember it didn't get above freezing for like 4 or 5 days, and it got so cold that toilets did break, the holding tanks did break, the bowl itself did break. I know, because mine did. We had septic tanks out in Bayou George that the drain lines were frozen. I mean, I don't. I remember it was cold, and it happened on December 22nd or 23rd. It came down, a cold front did. And it stayed it stayed cold all the way till January. And it was probably the most miserable. And that's when all the oranges froze down in South Florida. That was when all the oranges froze. I want to say it was 1982, 81, 82, somewhere in that area. And that's what kept me in business, because all I did for the next 6 months was replace freeze plugs, broken blocks, fix broken blocks, weld up blocks, head gaskets. That's all I did was fix cars, because back then in the 80s, no one put antifreeze in their older model cars. Only the newer model cars, the ones that were maintained, because people thought antifreeze back in the 80s was just to keep cars from freezing. And here in Florida, it never gets cold enough to freeze, or so they thought. And by the time that happened, a lot of damage had taken place. But it does get cold here, and it affects plumbing and it affects cars. But water can be your friend or it can be your biggest enemy. And one of the things that y'all do is you have water coming into the house and you have water leaving the house about 3 or 4 inches from each other, which is amazing how plumbers can do that. But there's a lot more to getting water out of your house than having it drain downhill. What are some of the things that need to be checked when someone comes and says, I need you to look at my plumbing, my drain lines, it's driving slow? What do y'all do to make sure that's done correctly, or what it needs to be done?
Well, sure. What we do, first of all, if you're referring to our plumbing checkups, is we will check the drainage of each fixture and see if it's something local to that fixture, or if there's something that's, because all of your pipes, imagine holding up your hand and you look at your fingers, and each finger is a fixture, and they all come to one main pipe, which would be your arm. So everything's interconnected. So we determine, do you have a local issue to a fixture, or is it a common problem throughout the whole system? And some of the ways we can determine that is by checking each fixture. Sometimes if you're running your lavatory or flush your toilet or run your wash machine, the water may come up in your tub or shower, and that you have a main line blockage, which would be the main pipe going out of the home. And then, of course, if you have proper access to that main drain through a clean out on the exterior of the home, we should be able to camera that line down towards the street, the city connection or septic, and then back up into the home to determine what kind of condition the pipe is in. So
you can take an endoscope, that's the best way I know, a borescope, whatever, and actually go down the lines and camera it to see if there's an obstruction like roots or a clog of some sort into the drain, and solve that problem?
Absolutely. Okay. And determine, is it just a soft blockage? Is it root intrusion? Or is the bottom of the pipe completely gone?
That's a good point.
Which is common.
That is common. I didn't think about how common it was. You were telling me the other day that a lot of people over the years, the 20, 30, 40-year-old houses, put caustic drain cleaners down their drain to open them up because they get clogged, and it eats the bottom of the pipe where you have nothing. There's no bottom of the pipe. Instead of having a round pipe, you got just a pipe that's a U shape, the bottom's gone. If that makes
right.
And that's kind of, wow, you sent me pictures of it, like, how does that work? But when the rainy season comes, I bet you that's when people notice their drains get slowed down because the pipes are being flooded. Well, what's left of the pipes from all the water table coming up. That's probably a big problem this time of year when the rains come. Most people be having, and you said
it sure is, and if we continue the rain the way it's been, and we start losing evaporation, the humidity drops, and we come out of the summertime, it's going to be a busy winter for us in septic systems. That's for sure.
Well, it really will be. One of the things I'm hoping for, the rain will stop where my bees can start bringing in nectar. They're bringing in pollen from the goldenrod out there. It's called Canada goldenrod, I found out. It's a beautiful plant, and it doesn't make you sneeze because the pollen's too heavy to be carried in the breeze, but bees love it, and my bees just can't get it because it's so wet. They just can't bring it in, but they're going to. If this weather ever dries out, I'm going to have a real good summer, fall honey run this year. But that's just what's happening up in the woods where I live. I have a lot of beehives up there, but I do notice that the weather, I can't dig down more than about 3 feet of my property up there before I hit water. I'm down there where I'm at. I'm kind of in a low area. So, and normally you can dig down 4, 5, 6 feet with no problem whatsoever. So the water tables definitely come up. So that's going to affect a lot of people's septic tanks in the next few weeks. I'm pretty sure if this rain doesn't slow down, it's going to. So if their septic tanks need to be pumped out, what are some of the signs that there's something wrong with the septic tank? Slow draining, maybe?
Well, it's going to be slow drainage. I know, you know, the folks that have septics, they probably heard this sound when they flush their toilet. They'll hear the clucking sound. You know, it's almost like it's sucking for air. Or they do a load of laundry, and they'll hear their toilets kind of sucking for air, and that just tells you that main line is full to that septic. And it, you know, depending on the situation, if we're getting a lot of heavy torrential rains, it may be a situation where they have to just wait for the rains to stop and slow down before to correct itself. We've been caught out to homes where, you know, their backyard is just underwater, and there's not a whole lot we can do in that situation until it dries out a little bit.
Yeah, I know it sounds terrible, but I guess what I would do in a case like that was emergency, I would take the clean out plug out. I guess that would allow it at least to, it would go in the backyard, but it wouldn't go in my house. That's what I would say if I'm out in the country. I know you're not supposed to do that, but that's what I would do.
It's a lot easier to, you know, we can't condone, you know, sewage spills, obviously, but if you got a choice between cleaning your home, the place where you lay your head at night, or cleaning the yard, I think I'd rather clean the yard than have to clean my house.
And so the best thing out there, if you're listening to the show, know where your clean out or inspection port is. If you don't know where it's at, you need to know where it's at, and if you don't have one, you need to get one. And didn't you tell me that most houses have 2 of them, one at the house and one at the road? If they're on
most houses do. If you're on city sewer, there should be one within 2 feet of the home where the pipe exits the home, and then there should be one where the connection is from where you connect to the city's connection. And that a lot of times the city would actually come out and inspect or take a look at that pipe to see if the problem is on your side or the city side.
Well, that's good advice.
So you need one on both.
That's good advice. And if you don't have one, some houses don't have one, get one installed. Call Mr. Reuter at 763-2001 and have them go do a courtesy check on your home and sign up for their Advantage Plan. Because if you don't know anything about the Advantage Plan, ask. It's worth the money. It really is. Hey, Scott, I'm going to have to let you go. We'll talk. Fall is here. Kids are in school. Holidays are around the corner. Time to visit friends and family. Give us a call, 850-763-0555 for your free AAA safety inspection.